Before I dive into this one, let me just say this. If you're sitting with your coffee or your late-night thoughts, I'm grateful you're here. An old man doesn't take company for granted anymore. And if stories like these help you feel a little less alone in your own battles, then pull up a chair and stay a while. I've got a truth to tell you, and it's got splinters. I never wanted to be a burden. That was the one promise I made to myself back when my knees still bent without complaining, and my hands didn't shake pouring a cup of water. But age has its own plans, and it doesn't ask for permission. It just settles in, like winter creeping under the door. It started small. A fall in the bathroom that left a bruise shaped like Vermont on my hip. A couple of mornings where I woke up confused about whether I'd taken my blood pressure pill. Little things, but even little things can cast long shadows when you're alone in a quiet house. That's when Rebecca stepped in. My daughter. My only daughter. She showed up one Sunday with a grocery bag in one hand and that determined smile she always wore when she wanted to prove something. Told me she'd take care of things, make life easier for me, spend more time at the house. I didn't argue. It felt nice, if I'm honest. Comforting, like warm soup on a cold day. She started cleaning out drawers, organizing my medications, updating my calendar. She brought me those soft socks with the little rubber grips on the bottom. She made tea that smelled like cinnamon in old bookstores. For a while, I let myself believe I'd done something right raising at least one decent child. But then there were moments, tiny ones, but they pricked at me. Like the time I walked into the kitchen and she was whispering sharply on the phone. Her back stiff, her hand curled tight around the counter's edge. She hung up the second she heard my footsteps and plastered on that bright, brittle smile. Said it was just the pharmacy. But I could still feel the tension buzzing in the room like a trapped mosquito, or the time she insisted on answering the door for me. Every knock, every visitor. She'd step in front of me like she was shielding me from something I couldn't see. Once, I heard my neighbor Martha asking if I wanted to join her for a walk, and Rebecca told her I was resting. I wasn't. I was sitting on the couch listening to the whole thing. I tried telling myself she was just being protective. Maybe overly protective, sure, but her heart was in the right place, wasn't it? The real hint came one afternoon while she was tidying up the living room. She paused at my old flip phone, the one Mary gave me on our 25th anniversary, and sighed like it was a piece of trash. Called it ancient. I joked that it still worked fine for me, but she didn't laugh. Instead, she took it, turned it over, and said, almost too quietly, "This thing causes more trouble than it's worth." Something about the way she said it made a cold thread run down my spine. But I pushed the feeling aside. That's what we do when we love someone. We excuse the shadows because we miss the light. If only I'd trusted that instinct. If only I'd picked up on the small, sharp signs she kept leaving like broken shells on a beach. I didn't know it yet, but the truth was already slipping through the cracks. Waiting for the moment I'd hear it echo through that little plastic phone. I woke up the next morning to the smell of lemon cleaner stinging the air. Rebecca was already moving around the house, her footsteps quick and sharp, like she was trying to stay ahead of a storm only she could see. She'd opened the windows even though the air outside still had that early spring bite in it. I pulled my sweater tighter and shuffled into the hallway. She didn't notice me at first. She was standing over my desk, sorting through old mail, tossing envelopes into a trash bag with a kind of urgency that didn't fit the task. When she finally turned, she startled hard, clutching a stack of papers to her chest. "Dad, you shouldn't be up yet," she said, too fast, too forced. I told her I wasn't made of glass. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes and guided me back to the kitchen. The kettle hissed on the stove. She poured tea into my favorite chipped mug, the one Mary painted little blue flowers on. She slid it toward me, and for a second her hand lingered on the table, trembling, just enough for me to notice. "You doing all right, honey?" I asked. She blinked. Too many times. "I'm fine, just a lot to manage." I wanted to tell her to slow down, to breathe, but she was already moving again, wiping down counters that were already clean, straightening objects that didn't need straightening. It wasn't care. It was control disguised as responsibility. Later that afternoon, the house got quiet. That eerie kind of quiet where even the refrigerator seems to hold its breath. I went to my chair by the window, the one with the deep cushion that still smells a little like Mary's lavender oil. I tried reading, but my mind kept circling back to the look on Rebecca's face, that thin thread of panic woven through her smile. Eventually, she left to run errands, and the door closed with a softness that felt intentional, like she didn't want the neighbors hearing anything. I watched her car disappear down the street. The house settled, creaked, and sighed the way old houses do when they think no one's listening. I reached for my flip phone out of habit, just to check the time. When I clicked it open, the screen lit up with a message I didn't recognize. One new voice message. Strange. That phone barely held a charge, let alone recorded anything by accident. I must have pressed something earlier. I must have hit a button without realizing. I didn't think much of it. I pressed play. The first thing I heard was a sharp exhale. Not mine. Then Rebecca's voice spilled out, thinner and harsher than I'd ever heard it. I can't keep waiting, she said. It needs to happen sooner. He trusts me. That's the whole point. Once everything is sorted, we can move forward. No, he won't question it. He believes everything I tell him. The room tilted. The tea on my tongue turned to metal. There was a pause, a muffled voice I couldn't make out, and then Rebecca again, sharper this time. Just let me handle it. I know what I'm doing. And stop saying it's cruel. He's old. He won't understand the difference. The sooner we're done, the sooner life can go back to normal. My hands tightened around the phone. The plastic creaked. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Another voice tried to speak from her side of the call, but she cut it off. No, I'm not backing out. I'm tired of cleaning up after him. I'm tired of living in this house. I'm tired of pretending. Once he's out of the way, everything lines up. The message clicked off. Just silence, heavy, suffocating silence. My breath shook as I set the phone down on the armrest. I stared at it like it was a loaded weapon someone had placed in my lap. My own daughter, my Rebecca. The little girl who used to braid weeds into my shoelaces and laugh when I pretended they were snakes. What was she planning? What did out of the way mean? What did she want so badly that she'd speak about me like I was a chore, a barrier, a problem to solve? I sat there for a long time, listening to the clock tick, each sound sharp as a pinprick. My chest felt tight, like someone had cinched a rope around it. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. There's a kind of betrayal so deep it dries you out. When Rebecca came home an hour later, humming softly as she set her keys down, I watched her from the doorway. Her face softened when she saw me, that gentle, daughterly expression she'd been wearing for weeks. She asked if I wanted dinner, and for the first time, I didn't trust the sound of her voice. I didn't trust the way she touched my shoulder. I didn't trust her at all. The message echoed in my mind, word for word, slicing clean through the air. Once he's out of the way, every instinct I had, every instinct I'd ignored for months, rose up like a warning flare. I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever she was planning, whatever she thought she could hide, I couldn't let her get ahead of me anymore. Not after hearing the truth she never meant for me to hear. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the faint glow of the street lamp cutting a crooked line across the ceiling. My mind kept replaying her words, twisting them, sharpening them, making them feel even colder than when I first heard them. Once he's out of the way, that sentence kept landing like a stone in my gut. The house felt different now. Every creak sounded like it carried a warning. Every shadow seemed a little too still. Even the air felt heavier, like it knew something I didn't. Around 3 in the morning, I finally got up. My joints protested, but I didn't care. I shuffled to the living room and sat in my old recliner. The leather was cold, and it made a soft crackling sound when I leaned back. A familiar sound, one that made me feel grounded. I pressed the flip phone open again, confirming the message was real. Not a nightmare, not confusion, not age, real. So what exactly was she planning? Moving me into a facility? Taking control of my accounts? Something worse? I didn't know. That was the worst part, not knowing. By sunrise, I had made a decision, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. I was going to watch her, quietly, carefully, the way a man watches a fox pacing too close to his chicken coop, not out of hatred, out of survival. When Rebecca woke up, she came downstairs with her hair tied up and her voice soft, like always. She made oatmeal, the cinnamon kind she knew I liked, and set the bowl in front of me. She smiled, warm on the surface, hollow underneath. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked. I nodded, lied. I watched her hands instead of her face. Her fingers were steady, too steady. It made me wonder how long she'd been practicing this performance. She talked about errands, about reorganizing the medicine cabinet, about the home nurse she might ask to visit. My stomach tightened. A nurse? Why? What was she preparing for? Or framing? I stirred my oatmeal slowly, pretending to listen. The smell of cinnamon and oats filled the room, comforting and nauseating at the same time. I wanted to believe she meant well. I wanted to believe the voice message had been taken out of context, misheard, misunderstood. But innocence doesn't whisper about getting someone out of the way. Later that afternoon, she told me she needed to handle some personal paperwork and went upstairs. Normally, I'd stay out of her business, but everything felt different now, like the rules had shifted without my permission. I waited until I heard her bedroom door close. Then I followed the faint clicking sound coming from the dining table. My old papers were scattered across it, bills, medical forms, and a file she clearly didn't think I'd look at. I stepped closer. My name was printed across the top of one document in thick black letters. It was a power of attorney form, unsigned, but filled out. My chest tightened. Not completely filled. She still needed my signature. But the rest? My bank info, my medical preferences. She'd already typed them in, and the reason for enactment line read, cognitive unreliability due to declining mental state. Declining mental state. I gripped the table edge. My breath rattled. I read it twice, then a third time, making sure my eyes weren't lying. My handwriting was shaky these days, sure. I forgot my keys sometimes, yes. But declining mental state? Enough to hand her full legal control over everything I owned and every decision I could make. I felt something hot rise in my chest. Anger. Not sharp anger. Deep anger. The kind that burns slow and heavy and dangerous. I heard footsteps on the stairs. I slid the papers back exactly the way she'd left them and stepped away from the table. She walked in with a folded towel and smiled when she saw me, but her eyes flickered to the papers. Her heartbeat jumped in her neck. A small jump, but I caught it. "You shouldn't be standing so long," she said, too casually. "You know how tired you get." I nodded again. My silence unsettled her. Good. As the day stretched on, I watched her more closely. Every glance, every move. She kept checking her phone, whispering to someone, pacing the hallway. Twice, she stepped outside to talk privately. Once she opened the door only to close it again when she saw I was watching. Near sunset, she brought me my evening pills. I always took them without thinking, but tonight something felt off. The colors looked different. The arrangement was different. The dosage looked too high on one pill. The white one that normally came in halves was whole tonight. I stared at it. She stared at me. "Take them," she said gently. I picked up the glass of water but didn't drink. Something instinctive stopped me. The hairs on my arms rose. "Did the doctor change anything?" I asked. Her expression froze for a split second. The smallest crack, but a real one. "He adjusted a few things," she said. "It's normal. You don't need to worry." Except I'd called my doctor 2 days earlier. There had been no changes. I set the cup down. Slowly, deliberately. She watched my hand, then my face, and something in her eyes changed. She knew I knew. Not the whole truth, but enough. The tension in the room was thick enough to chew. "Rebecca," I said quietly, "sit down." She didn't. She stood there with her arms crossed tightly like she was bracing for an earthquake. "I'm not taking these pills until I know exactly what's in them." Her smile returned, but it wasn't kind anymore. It was thin, paper thin. "Dad," she whispered, "you're getting paranoid. You're not yourself." Maybe, but I wasn't taking that pill. Not tonight. Not ever again without checking. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she reached for the pills, her jaw clenched and swept them off the table with just a little too much force. "Fine," she muttered. "Have it your way." She left the room. The medicine bottles rattled on the counter from the impact of her movement. I waited until I heard her bedroom door close again before letting out the breath I'd been holding. Whatever she was planning, tonight proved one thing. It wasn't just talk. And it wasn't just paperwork. It was already in motion. The next morning, the air felt heavier than usual, like it had soaked up all the tension from the previous night. Sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, cutting lines across the floor, and for some reason, the smell of burnt toast lingered in the kitchen. I had made it myself, a weak attempt at breakfast, but it wasn't about the food. It was about proving to myself that I was still capable of simple things, even when the world around me seemed intent on taking that capability away. Rebecca was already moving about the house. Her footsteps were quiet but calculated. Every movement was precise, almost rehearsed. She hummed softly while tidying, a tune I didn't recognize, one that felt too cheerful, too fake. My instinct screamed that she was masking something, but she had perfected the art of acting like everything was normal, the quiet confidence of someone who thinks they've already won. I sipped my coffee and watched her from the chair by the window. The steam curled up slowly, carrying the bitter scent of grounds that had been sitting too long. It reminded me of the kind of mornings Mary used to make when she thought the day was going to be easy, but this morning was not easy, not by a long shot. I tried to keep my movements casual, flipping through a newspaper I didn't really read. My ears were attuned to every creak of the floorboards, every faint shuffle. When she moved to the dining room table and opened my paperwork, my stomach knotted. I didn't need to see the forms to know what she was up to. The voice message had already told me everything. My daughter wasn't just planning, she was executing. I set the cup down and stood slowly, letting my joints protest. The room smelled faintly of cleaning solution and her perfume, an odd mix that made my head swim. I walked over to the table and leaned on the edge, not touching the papers yet, just watching her organize them. The way she did it, deliberate, careful, it was like watching a surgeon prepare for an operation. "Rebecca," I said, my voice calm but firm. She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't expected me to notice. Her hands hovered over the forms for a moment. Then she placed them neatly back in a folder. "Yes, Dad?" Her voice was smooth, composed. "Sit down," I commanded. She hesitated, her brow furrowed. Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, fear, maybe even guilt. But it vanished almost instantly, replaced with that practiced calm. "I don't need to sit," she said. "Everything's fine." I shook my head. "No, it isn't. Not anymore." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she finally lowered herself into the chair across from me. The chair creaked under her weight, the sound loud in the silence of the room. I folded my hands on the table, feeling the texture of the wood beneath my fingers. "I know about the message," I said. Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked it. "Message?" she asked, though her voice betrayed her. "The one you didn't mean for me to hear," I said. "The one where you talked about getting me out of the way." Her hands clenched in her lap. The color drained from her face. "Dad, You were planning," I interrupted. "Planning to take control of everything. Not to help me, not to care for me, but to move me aside." She swallowed hard. The room smelled faintly of her shampoo, the kind she uses when she wants to seem younger, fresher, more in control. But it wasn't enough to disguise the tension. I could see it in her eyes, in the slight tremble of her fingers. I didn't mean it like that," she said finally, her voice shaking. I panicked. I didn't know what to do." "Panicked?" I echoed. "You call planning my removal panicking?" Her lips quivered, and she glanced down at the folder on the table. "I just wanted to protect you," she whispered. "Protect me?" The words felt heavy, bitter. By lying to me? By plotting behind my back? That's not protection, Rebecca. That's betrayal. She looked away, biting her lip, as if she could erase the conversation with sheer will. But I wasn't done. "You're my daughter," I said, voice low but firm. "And I love you. But this stops now. No more decisions without me. No more secrets. From this moment, you do not have authority over my life, my health, or my choices." She tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "No, you need to understand. Trust, once broken, doesn't just return with an apology. You need to prove you're worthy." Her shoulders slumped. She looked small, vulnerable, human in a way that made my chest ache. Not from love, from sorrow. I realized then that betrayal cuts both ways. She had been planning something terrible, yes, but the fear driving her, The desperation, that was real too. I leaned back slightly, feeling the texture of the chair against my spine. "You're going to have to earn your place back," I said quietly. "I'll let you help, but only in ways I approve. You understand?" She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, Dad, I understand." The rest of the day passed in a fragile truce. I watched her movements, careful, precise, respectful. The air between us was taut, full of unspoken questions and cautious promises. There was no joy, no laughter, only the careful rebuilding of trust, brick by brick. As night fell, I sat in my chair again, the glow from the street lamp cutting angled lines across the floor. The house was quiet, but my mind raced. I thought about Mary, about the lessons she'd taught me, about raising children, about love, about the way life forces you to protect yourself even from those you love most. I didn't know if Rebecca would ever truly understand the weight of what she tried to do, or if she'd ever fully earn back my trust. But one thing was certain. I was awake now, alert, no longer naive, no longer unaware. And I would never let anyone, not even my own daughter, move me aside without my knowledge again. The morning sun came through the blinds like a spotlight, harsh and revealing. I hadn't slept well. Not that I could ever sleep normally after discovering what Rebecca had really been planning. I sat in my chair, the one with the cushion Mary embroidered, sipping coffee that tasted bitter but somehow grounding. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Her cleaning, I guessed. But it didn't comfort me. Everything smelled different now. Suspicious. Threatening. I knew I had to act. Not rashly, not with anger clouding my judgment, but with careful precision. She had overstepped, manipulated, and lied. And now I needed to reclaim my life before it was truly out of my hands. I called Whitman, my old lawyer friend. The line clicked, then his familiar gravelly voice answered. "Harry, didn't expect to hear from you this early." "Need your help," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's serious." By mid-morning, Whitman was at the house. I showed him the voice message, the draft paperwork, the way she had positioned herself as my decision-maker without my consent. His eyes grew heavy with concern. "She's already planning," he muttered. "Good thing you didn't sign anything, otherwise you might be legally stuck." "I want everything fixed. Quietly for now," I said. "She needs to understand there are boundaries, and she needs to know I'm not a passive old man." Whitman nodded. He had the kind of calm that comes from decades of untangling family disasters. He said he'd draft new documents, updated power of attorney, healthcare directives, living arrangements, all signed and notarized, all solid enough that she couldn't override them. Legal fortress, he called it. While he worked, I watched Rebecca move about the house. She didn't know Whitman was here yet. She was humming a tune, putting dishes away, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. I could see it, clear as day. She thought she was untouchable, but the envelope on the counter, her little blueprint for control, had already failed her. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to accuse. The truth had a quiet, unavoidable weight. When Whitman finished, I called Rebecca into the living room. Her smile faltered the second she saw him. The lawyer's presence was like a sudden wind that bends trees. She tried to act casual, but the tension in her shoulders told me she knew this wasn't a friendly visit. "Sit," I said. She hesitated, then did, slowly. She kept her hands folded in her lap, avoiding my gaze. "I've updated everything," I began. "Power of attorney, medical decisions, finances, all updated, notarized, legally binding. You no longer have authority over any part of my life." Her face paled. She opened her mouth to speak, but Whitman raised a hand, gentle but firm. "Let's hear him out first." I nodded at her. "Rebecca, I trusted you. I wanted to believe that you were the same child I raised, the one who braided weeds into my shoelaces and laughed when I pretended they were snakes. But the voice message, and the way you've moved behind my back, that's not the same daughter." Tears welled in her eyes. Real tears this time, not the kind that softened her performance. I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to what?" I asked. "'Cause harm? Betray trust? Plan for me to be sidelined like I'm an object and not a man?" Actions speak louder than excuses, Rebecca. She flinched at the word actions, like a warning bell. Whitman slid the folder across the table. She saw the legal documents, her face draining further. No threats, no shouting, just certainty. I leaned back, feeling a strange mix of grief and liberation. I'm not going to pretend this is easy. It hurts, what you tried to do. But I've lived long enough to know that protecting myself is my responsibility. And if that means I have to put boundaries between us, then boundaries there will be. She swallowed hard, nodding. I understand. Not fully, I suspected. But understanding is something that grows with time, not something demanded in a single sitting. We spent the afternoon in a tense quiet. I sipped tea, Whitman packed up his things, Rebecca occasionally dabbed at her eyes. The house no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a place reclaimed. Later, when she left the room to gather herself, I walked to the window and looked out. The street was quiet. Birds called somewhere in the distance. The scent of lemon cleaner lingered faintly, but now it was just a smell, not a warning. I breathed deeply. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control again. That evening, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote about betrayal, about love, about the delicate balance between trust and self-preservation. I wrote about how family can hurt more than strangers, and how sometimes survival is a quiet act of courage. I didn't know if Rebecca would ever fully grasp the weight of what she tried. I didn't know if our relationship would recover. But I did know one thing with absolute certainty. My life was mine again. My choices, my health, my dignity, all returned to me. And sometimes that's victory enough. As the house settled into night, I sat in my chair, feeling the warmth of the cushion and the faint smell of Mary's lavender lingering in the air. Quiet wisdom settled over me. Betrayal may scar the heart, but reclaiming your life is the closest thing to peace a man can find. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, stronger than I should drink at this hour, and whispered to the empty room, not every story ends with triumph, but surviving the ones that try to break you, that's its own kind of victory. I leaned back, letting the darkness and the quiet wrap around me, finally at ease. Tomorrow I would move forward, but tonight, I simply existed, unbroken and awake.